Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining God's Views on Political News. This is a show about political news, but we do it a little bit different here. What we do is we talk about news and politics, but we look at it from God's point of view as well. So I want to welcome my co-host, Bill Cloud. Bill, how you doing?
Hey, everybody. How are you doing? Susan, how are you doing today, this
Just
morning,
great. Thank
this
you.
afternoon, wherever you may be?
Wherever everybody is. There's certainly a lot to talk about today, Bill. We have it's like, it's not even day by day anymore. It's hour by hour.
That's the truth. That is the truth.
And it's really hard to keep up with what's going on because there's just so much. I'm sure that everybody or most everybody has heard about the Washington Post story. And I really want to kind of set out some factual basis for it so that people who haven't heard about it will know something about it and not get it all twisted news that they might hear from the mainstream media. So yesterday we had a report that came out, a breaking news report from the Washington Post. That should have been the first clue. That said President Trump met with the Russian foreign minister and the Russian ambassador at the White House when they were here. And he revealed to them classified information. Now, basically, what they went on to say, it was classified information regarding a source, who our allies are, that it, in some ways it could damage our relationship with our allies, on and on and on. I will say, to the credit of the White House, they immediately came out. General McMaster came out, the head of the NSA, and said, I was in the room. Nothing that the Washington Post is reporting is true. The whole gist of the story is not true. He did nothing that was inappropriate. He did not, release classified information. We also had Rex Tillerson that said the same thing, corroborated that story, and Nina Powell, who was also in the meeting, who said nothing happened. So that kind of gives you the story. And then Washington Post immediately comes out, because it's kind of what I look at it as the Saul Alinsky tactics. They come out and say, yes, but, and they go and they dissect every word that was said. So they look at every word that McMaster says, and then they say, well, wait a minute, we never said that. We didn't say that. So they always spin every story. What do you think about that, Bill?
Well, liars are really good at what they do. And that goes back to the father of liars. You always put a little bit of truth or it has to seem plausible. And then you mix it with a lot of things that are false. And people who are good at that know how to, they know how to dissect their words. They know how to parse their words. It depends on what the meaning of is.
Right.
So these people like the Washington Post and other in the media, and particularly those who have a progressive secular, worldview, they're really good at what they do. And they know that people are going to go for the eccentric, for the dramatic, for the over-the-top headline. And very few people actually dive into the substance of the report. And so what most people are left with, the guy that's just, busy going about doing his thing, who's perhaps already has an anti-conservative, or in this case, anti-Trump leaning, he's just going to take the headline and run with it. They know that. They know exactly what they're doing. So, and I say that being one that is not defensive of everything Donald Trump does. There's some things that I don't agree with, but when it comes to this tactic, that's the characteristic of a very good liar. And the Bible says we know who the father of lies is. So, again, it's always going to have some plausibility, if that's the right word,
Right.
But it's always mixed with things that just simply are not true. Now let me ask you this. And it seems like I read this somewhere, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't McMaster's political leanings more Democratic than Republican?
Yeah, and I think that he's been they've looked at McMaster as being more of a globalist, that type thing too,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, I mean, he really has no reason necessarily, other than the fact that he works for the president, I guess. But if you can trust anybody, I think we have come to learn that most of the time we can trust the military to tell us the truth, and he's former military, and so people feel pretty comfortable with him.
Well, my point would be if his political leanings are more democratic, then you would think that he would come out and be obviously evasive,
Right.
but when he came out, he was anything but that. He was direct and to the point. This did not happen, period.
Right. And he came out again today, and he said the same thing. And it was like a feeding frenzy with the media. They were just jumping on him again, dissecting every single word. And he repeated himself and said, I'm not going to tell you what's classified, what's not classified. We're not going to discuss about, what exactly was said, because basically it's to protect the United States. We're not supposed to know those things. I mean, people may not like it. The media may not like it. But he said at the end, and I thought was a very, it should end everything, a discussion on this, but it won't. He said at the end, I want you to know, we didn't even brief Donald Trump on who the sources were, where we got this information. He didn't even know who the source is, and that's who Washington Post is accusing him of saying who the source was and revealing that information. So, I mean, it's unbelievable about why this narrative keeps going. But Bill, it goes back to the Russian narrative. They want this whole Russian connection to keep going, and because they want to take down not only this president, and here I have to say this, Bill, because this is what makes me really angry. So
I was going to say you're very passionate today, Susan.
yeah, I've been worse. Let me just tell you, I'm calming it down here. But when they're getting these people on the left, the media, they're not only going after Trump, but they're going after you and me. And they're not only going after you and me, but they are putting the United States in jeopardy by the leaks that they are committing. This what was leaked to the Washington Post. It's illegal for anybody to leak this type of information to the Washington Post. And yet we'll never talk about that. We'll never find out who that leaker was. And so when you do that, you're affecting our allies. You're affecting their trust that they have in us, trust that we need from our allies. And yet these people continue to do this every single day. I think the American public ought to be outraged. And the American public has got to figure out what we do to stop people like the Washington Post. And I know that they have a right and a First Amendment right, and we need the media. But what we don't need the media to do is be in the pocket of whoever it is giving this information to them. And I have my suspicions, but we have to stop people who, like the media, when they intentionally want to get in on it and take this president down and harm our country.
Well, on one level, wouldn't this be considered yellow journalism?
Yeah.
But on a larger, much more life-threatening level, this is insurrection. This is, or at least could lead to, inciting an insurrection. I think that's what they really want to do, and which, I guess this is quite a leap for some, but in my mind, it's not. That's what the communists and the radicals and the progressives are really attempting to do, is to incite insurrection, to foment this rebellion, and then step back and say, well, we had nothing to do with it. We were just reporting the news.
Right.
And so, there's going to come a breaking point, and I'm not here to be doom and gloom, but nonetheless, just looking at this in the natural, you can't continue down this road without it leading to a bad place.
Right.
And there's going to be a breaking point, and either the conservative side and the side that is wanting to uphold law and order is going to break and concede ground to them, or they're going to dig in their heels, and there's going to be a war. I mean, we're already in a philosophical war, but at some point in time, there has to be a decision made. if you're going to incite this kind of a thinking and this is how I see it, trying to get people motivated to take this guy down physically, then somebody's going to have to stand up and do something. I mean, that's what I see. Maybe I'm wrong, but
we have Monique who says that they need to keep pushing their false narrative. That's talking about the mainstream media and those on the left against President Trump because of all the corruption they need to keep covered up. Can you imagine the paper trail? And I mean, isn't that true? Aren't there things that, are possibly being covered up that they don't want people to know? And so this is the perfect distraction. But
well, you would think so. I've often wondered when that whole WikiLeaks thing came up, and these emails going back and forth between Podesta and different people in the Clinton campaign, all the things that were used to bring her down.
Right.
I've just often wondered, did these people think that no one was going to see any of this? And the same,
so.
Well, obviously they were.
Yeah.
Same would be true here. If there is some underhandedness going on and a cabal to try to, see how we can bring this guy down. I would like to think that there are enough praying people in this country that they would petition God to bring to pass what he said. And that is everything that's done in secret will be shouted from the rooftops, that everything that's done in darkness will be brought to the light. And frankly, that is true on both sides. I wish we could get to the point that all these things that are done in secret, that are done in darkness and back rooms, things that have a sinister intention, I wish that those things could be brought to light and exposed for what they really are. Perhaps that's what we should consider doing, just asking God to bring these things to light. And if there is a conspiracy that involves the Washington Post and the Clintons and others, Obama, I think, maybe it's time that we pray, God, please bring those things to light. Please expose them for what they really are.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this, Bill, is really starting to be exposed because I think what we're seeing is, like you were talking about, on the left especially, it's chaos that's being created. The father of lies always seems to create chaos, and we're seeing a lot of that. And I think you also have to remember, and it's important to point out, I think the media is still very mad, very angry that they weren't invited to this meeting with the Russians. They weren't there to get the information that they wanted to get. They weren't there for the photo ops. And they've even come out and said, why weren't we allowed in there to take pictures and things of that nature?
Well, gosh, just can you imagine the egos with these people?
Yeah.
Well, why would I invite someone who hates my guts into something like that? Why would I want somebody who's at every turn trying to undermine what I do, twist what I say, and to misrepresent me to people? I mean, again, I'm not the biggest Donald Trump fan. There are things that I definitely disagree with him about, and there are things that I agree with him about. But he's the president. He's the president of the United States, and we need to the utmost of our ability support him as long as he is doing what is right and in the best interest of the country. So I have to say that on this, I'm going to come down on the side of Donald Trump. Not only would I not invite him to that, I would start questioning whether or not I need to even brief them on anything. They're going to print what they want anyhow. So let them say what they're going to say, and I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. Now, that's how I feel about it. I'm not a politician, So, but then again, Donald Trump claims not to be a politician himself. So maybe he should consider that. Just, if the media is going to print whatever they want the news to be anyway, hey, maybe he should just break all privileges for the press in that regard.
Yeah, and I think the difficulty comes, because we have this Russian narrative that the left keeps pushing every 5 minutes, and this is a Saul Alinsky tactic. The more often you say it, the longer you say it, people will start to believe it. The problem is if you say, let's don't have these press briefings anymore, let's don't have the media, let's don't invite them, the first thing you're going to get is, okay, what about our First Amendment rights as the media, the press, which they have a point with that. And number two, it's going to be, oh, well, you just don't want us to be there because you're going to say things to the Russians that you don't want us to hear. We always knew that you were in bed with the Russians, on and on and on.
Well, my argument to that would be they're already doing that.
Yes.
So, and as far as their First Amendment rights to free speech, yeah, you have free speech. I don't know that the president is obligated to necessarily brief them on everything. I don't know that they have a First Amendment right to that. That's what I'm saying. Yeah. And so they're printing what they want to print anyway. So I don't know. I'm not a politician, and I'm not in that position. So I don't know necessarily what the best thing to do would be. However, I know this: that liars lie, and you will not change that. There is nothing that you can concede to them that's going to keep them from pushing a lie. And its roots are buried in the fact that there is, unfortunately, a large segment of this country that do not believe in the fundamentals of a republic, a constitutional republic. They do not want a government in a country that is a law and order country. They want chaos. They want lawlessness. And that's what they're pushing for at every opportunity given to them.
Yeah. And also, I think it's really important to remember this whole thing with Washington Post. Even if the president had said confidential or classified information, as the president, he has the authority to do that. He can take any piece of information and declassify it right there on the spot. So there was nothing illegal that this president did. This goes back to the narrative of Trump, and the Washington Post knows this. And I think they even put that in their article, that there wasn't really anything illegal that he did. Well, no, there wasn't anything illegal that he did. And they knew that. It's to push that narrative. Oh, this president is incompetent. This president isn't, he's mentally unstable. And, the whole thing goes back to the fact they know what career politicians look like. They're used to working with career politicians and understanding how the game works. They don't understand now how the game works because there is no game that is anything that they're familiar with. You have a president who's totally different than anybody they ever thought they would have. They don't know how to handle it.
That is an understatement. I saw a little political cartoon the other day, and it was, and I'll kind of boil it down. It was on one side, it was the Democrats at a board with all this Post-it notes and arrows connecting these equations and formulas. And it said, Democrats trying to figure out what Trump is doing. And on the right, of course, Trump was doing something very simplistic, nothing real complicated, and it was kind of comical. And it said what Trump is actually doing. And so I guess my thing is kind of with what you said, they're not accustomed to someone who is just plain spoken, and we have to give him that. The man is plain spoken, and who sets out to do something, and he takes charge. He takes the bull by the horns, and I commend that. I may not agree on everything he says or does, but at least I can respect the fact that someone, this is what I think, this is what I'm going to say. Like it or leave it. They don't know how to deal with that. Now, I was going to say something else, and I turned 54 on Monday, so I had a senior moment. So I was going somewhere with that.
Well, I just think that that Monique was talking again about. Remember that Obama pulled a fast one on the last day of his administration, opening up all that information. But see, we never talk about the truth. We don't talk about things like that we have factual information on. And I say I'm meaning the left when they do, mainstream media when they come out, they don't talk facts. They talk accusations. And again, the American public, we talked about a minute ago, Bill, and you were saying people need to pray that, all of this darkness comes out into the light and all this stuff is revealed. I think the American public needs to look seriously and think about what they need to do in order to help this president. Now, why should you help this president? Because right now, this man, like him or not, is your president in the White House. And he's the person in charge of our country. And this is our country. Monique says happy birthday, by the way. Uh,
Oh, thank you.
and this is our country. And it's not only Donald Trump that they're attacking. They're attacking the American public by attacking this president and leaving us open to attack by what they keep revealing, by not allowing this president to move our government forward and get things done. That impacts the American people. And I don't think it's anything was a coincidence that, they got rid of Comey. So the left doesn't like that. They did some things that the left didn't like. They were successful in getting Obamacare off the table and getting something new put in its place, not altogether, we're just in the House, but we're moving forward. They don't want us to move forward. They don't want America to move forward, because if America moves forward under this president and not under the left's leadership, it's going to show, who the left really is. And they're frightened to death of that.
Well, it goes back to what I said earlier. There is a large contingent of people in this country who do not want a constitutional republic. They do not want a country of law and order. They want lawlessness. They want chaos. This is the devil's playground. This is where the progressives and the communists and all these people, this is where the anarchists, this is what they want. This is what they're trying to create. In a apples and oranges comparison, it's akin to the chaos that certain Islamic groups want to create in the world. They want to create chaos, and they believe that in that chaos, that's where they emerge victorious. And so same things going on here. And like I said, in an apples and oranges way, but still the same thing. They want to create chaos. They want to disrupt. They want to undermine. And they are convinced that if they can do that, they'll emerge victorious. The thought that escaped me just a moment ago was prompted by the fact that you said that this press and the left is not accustomed to this kind of a president, this kind of a leader. And somebody brought this up, and I've been looking at this, and it's just something interesting. I'm going to toss it out there. People can go look it up, read it for themselves, and they can come to their own conclusions. But interestingly, in the history of Israel, there was a time, this was during the days of the prophet Elijah and then the prophet Elisha, but there came a time when there was a man by the name of Jehu who was anointed to be king, and his mission given by God was to go destroy the people that worshiped Baal and all of the different false gods, and he ultimately destroys Jezebel. Now, what it says about this guy is, and this is why it's appropriate for this conversation, this guy, and I'm going to paraphrase it, was unlike anything anybody had ever seen. He was a bull in a china shop. In fact, he was even thought to be crazy at times because he had these unconventional approaches. He was just, let's get the job done.
Right.
So I think it's kind of an interesting thing to look at in the story of Jehu. And I say that because I believe in patterns. I believe the Bible teaches us not just what happened, but what is happening. So somebody brought that to my attention. I looked at it. It is kind of interesting to consider that in a similar fashion, that's what Donald Trump is. He is unlike anything anybody has ever seen, especially the president. Some people think he's crazy. I'm not saying that, but he certainly is unconventional in how he's approaching this office.
Yeah, he really is. And I think one thing, because he is so unconventional, people can't control him. Right. They can't manipulate the office. I mean, they are trying to manipulate the office by all of these distractions, by coming out and saying things, by making false allegations. Nothing has been proven. I mean, let's all remember that. Nothing, zero has been proven. And yet here we are, how many days past 100 days in the White House, and we're still talking about this false narrative. And we're going to keep doing that.
Well, as I understand it, and you can enlighten me if there's other things that need to be brought up, but basically this boils down to they're still harping on the fact that they believe the Russians revealed information, or information was given to the Russians to reveal, that kept Hillary Clinton from winning the White House. And my thing is, even if the Russians had done that, Even if they had done that, what did they do? They revealed the truth about her. I'm so, there's probably other tentacles, in that whole Russian collusion thing, but, the alleged Russian collusion. Right. But that's what it boils down to me. Even if they did, what they did was they revealed what kind of a person she really is and what kind of people she surrounds herself with. So yeah, that's what, the Goebbels of the world and the Sololinskys of the world do. They keep repeating something over and over and over, by the way, exploiting the ignorance of a large part of the populace who don't know about these things, who don't really care to know about the substance of these things. They play to their emotions, and they keep repeating these things over and over and over and trying to find something that sticks.
Yeah, and I think that the whole thing is, with Hillary, here is an individual that thought she had this in the bag. And not only, this was not just about Hillary. This was the hopes of the entire far left that thought Hillary was going to get into the White House, and they, via Hillary, could continue in power for the next 4, 8, 16 years, whatever the case may be. And the whole thing blew up in their faces, and they can't handle that because, and now again, they're looking at how do we undermine the government? We can't just come out and, it's treasonous to come out and go against the government. So we can't do that. So we'll do it another way. We'll do it kind of underground. Someone is saying a perpetrator always pushes a false narrative to fool people. But again, God works tirelessly through his faithful ones to unveil the truth. And on that point, Bill, what I was saying a minute ago, we on the right, we have a tendency to sit back and do nothing. It's like we think that, well, the truth will come out eventually. Yes, the truth will come out eventually. We all know in the end, the truth does win, and we win. But in the meantime, what do we do? I'm not one for sitting back and doing nothing. That's just not in my nature.
And we shouldn't. And we've talked about this before. The reason that we're in this situation to begin with is because decades ago, good people decided to do nothing. We became complacent. We became enamored with all of our gadgets and gizmos. And well, I mean, honestly, we did. And so we let our guard down, and that's how the adversary operates. I mean, spiritually, biblically, the devil, Satan, whatever you'd like to call him, he doesn't come wearing a red suit, carrying a pitchfork. He comes posing as an angel of light. He comes appearing as or posturing as something that is actually good. And he always hides the evil intent. And so if we're lazy, if we're apathetic, if we're distracted by all of our stuff, then we're not as keen to pick up on what he's doing. Now, there's always been those that have been sounding the alarm, throughout, but they're in the minority, and they usually get hushed. They usually get pushed to the side, even by so-called conservatives and Christians and things like that. Right. So you're right. We can't sit back and do nothing. We have to stand up and we have to do something. Now, let me add this. We can't expect to, in our doing something, that we're going to prevail if we take an exclusive political approach to this. It can't be exclusively through politics, and even through what we're doing here. That can't be our only. That can't be the only weapon in our arsenal. Right. Because you see, the problem is not a political issue. The problem is a spiritual issue. The politics is the byproduct of the spiritual problem. So we have to approach this spiritually as well. Yes, get on, the air and talk about these things and try to enlighten people as to the truth and what it is, and exposing the falsehoods, and getting involved politically and getting involved in our communities at the municipal level, the state level, and yes, the federal level. Yeah, do those things, but pair it with the spiritual battle as well. And that means prayer. That means turning from our wickedness. That means upholding what God says is right, and exposing what God says is wrong. And
I absolutely agree with that, because this isn't just, a battle that we're facing here on earth politically, it is a spiritual battle. While you're talking, one of the things that I keep thinking of is our kind of what we turn to here on earth is boycotting. Do we do something like a boycott on the Washington Post to try to take business away from them? Will that really work? Because there's so many on the left. It's a left leaning news organization anyway. Is that going to matter? Then if the answer is no, because we can't do that or it's not going to have any effect, then what do we do? I mean, we've watched how they've just taken apart, let's say like Fox News. The conservative voices on Fox News are all but gone. And the conservative voices are continuing to be gone. And so, what's the next step? What can you rationally do as a person who looks at that and says, I'm going to pray, but what else can I do?
Well, I'll use myself as an example. There was a certain large department store that came out in support of, gay pride and LGBT this and that and the other, and stood against anybody who took a stand against that. And I don't want to mention any names, Target, but anyway, what my family and I decided is we don't shop there anymore.
Right.
Now, maybe they won't miss my business, but if I stop shopping there and you stop shopping there and the next guy stops shopping there, and as I understand it, a lot of people took that frame of mind and that kind of action, and it starts hurting their bottom line, and they posture and they say, oh, it's not really that bad. Well, okay, so what? I'm still not going to shop there. And then these other companies, I realize that if we start going down this road, where does it end? I don't know. But as these things come to my attention, I make a decision. I'm not going to shop there. I'm not going to buy their product. And I'm going to make sure that people I know and that I come in contact with realize, hey, do you know that they support this and they're behind that? So I think that it may not have a dramatic effect tomorrow, but if we start standing up and denying ourselves, and that's what it's going to come down to, Susan, because it was very convenient to go to this particular store. It's very convenient to go to a particular coffee shop,
Exactly.
But I have to say no to myself. I have to deny myself. What's more important here, my flesh and my wants and my desires, or my principles? That's the question that has to be asked of us as believers. When it comes to what do I do besides pray, I have to take some action. I have to make some decisions.
No, I absolutely agree. I don't go to Starbucks anymore because of that very reason. Because of their philosophies aren't in line with my Christian principles, and I don't go there. And a lot of people, I know it's hard for them because they say, yeah, but that would be almost like blocking every store. No, but it's not blocking every store. But look at the impact that we had on Chick-fil-A when everybody stood together and didn't let them harm Chick-fil-A's business. And we do have that impact. And I think Christians have to continue to learn that they have an impact, but they do have to stand up. And maybe this is good practice for what may be coming down the pike for Christians as more persecution begins.
I absolutely 110% agree. I mean, look, anybody who, excuse me, is a bodybuilder. One of my sons, he's not a professional bodybuilder, but he is pretty active with that. And pardon me, I've got to cough. And I'm not going to have a coffee like you did a few. But you don't walk into a gym and start lifting 400 pounds. You don't start running 2 miles on the first a step to get your body back in shape. You have to work up to it. And so you're not going to convince me that when it really comes down to it, and it's really important, I'm going to take a stand later on down the road, but you haven't taken a stand today. Come on, you're kidding yourself. You have to start making decisions that, are going to require a sacrifice on your part if you're going to stand on your principles. Might it be that a lot of these things are happening because God's people, they'll pray about it, but they won't do anything about it? Maybe God is saying, I hear your prayers, but when are you going to do something? When are you going to take a stand? When are you going to stand up and let your voice be heard? Something to consider.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And again, this whole issue with the Washington Post, it's not over. The whole thing about the Russian narrative, it's not over. It's not going to be over. And I think we have to prepare ourselves for the long run and the long haul, because this will keep going. Now, the harm comes too in the fact that people may say, God, I just want this all over with. I just want to return to a time when, my government, everything like this wasn't happening every day. I just want to elect somebody that can just go in there and get the job done. And it's certainly not going to be Trump, because look at him, he can't get the job done. That's the harm. And I think that is something that the narrative they also want to push so that occurs. And again, I'm hoping that people will open their eyes and their ears, and they won't fall for what's going on, that they will start fighting back, so that we won't have a president falsely accused, or a president that's going to be rendered incapable by all of the false news without 1 ounce of factual information to back it up.
Well, unfortunately, most people, and this is particularly true of Americans, we want our warm fuzzies. We want our cafe lattes, and we want our iPhone 7s, and we want our stuff. We like our lifestyles. And so we'll get upset to a degree. But when we realize, and I'm speaking in general terms here, when we realize that if for what I want, I'm going to have to fight for it, I just want my warm fuzzies back. Somebody just fix it.
Yeah.
That, unfortunately, I feel anyway, is the mindset of many, many, many Americans. If we go back into history, I don't know that a lot of people realize this, but it was a very small minority of Americans who fought the revolution. There was a lot of people who were wanted to stay British. They wanted to stay true to King George. There are a lot of people who didn't want to get involved. They didn't, we don't want to do this. This is messing up our life, etc. It was actually, relatively anyway, a small number of people who fought the revolution.
Yeah.
But everyone else benefited from it. All right. So it's always been that way, is what I'm trying to say. There's always been the remnant of people who actually take action. And I'm not saying taking up arms. That's not what I mean. But I mean standing up and speaking the truth and exposing the lie, and concert with petitioning heaven to give us light, to help us understand what our next step is. There's something that's written in the scripture that seems appropriate to bring out here. It's found in Exodus chapter 13. And it basically says this, that when the children of Israel were coming out of the land of Egypt, they were armed. They had weapons in their hand. They came out armed. But God didn't take them directly into the land of Canaan, because he said, if I do that, they're going to see war, and they'll want to turn around and go back to Egypt. So here's what he's saying. They're not really willing to fight for the land of Canaan. They're not really willing to fight for what's in their best interest. And so he had to take them through the wilderness and that whole experience, as difficult as it was, to learn how to say no to themselves so that they would be willing to fight for what was important. So my application of that to this discussion is that we see these things going on in our country, our government, how our president's being attacked, and how conservative values are being assailed, and how the constitutional republic that has brought unprecedented blessing, not just to us, but people all over the world, how that's all being undermined, it's under attack, and we want it fixed. But how many people are willing to fight, to starting on their knees, and then rising up and speaking out and exposing and taking action? Again, I want to make sure that this is very clear. I'm not talking about taking up arms. Right. I'm talking about doing what's possible for me to do to make my voice heard. And if you do it, I do it, and the next guy does it, I believe that we'll find that there are more of us than there are of them.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And your microphone's having a little
Or
bit of
did it?
a
Did it?
move.
Did it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I
Just
moved
move.
my arm. Sorry.
Yes, that's okay. No, but you're absolutely right, and I know what you're saying is do what you legally can do and morally can do to fight back against the injustices that we're seeing. And yeah, it's very very good advice, and we'll have to just see what's going on. Again, it's not going to stop the Christians who are willing to fight this battle. They need to stand up. Now is the time to rise up. Now is the time also to fight this battle for your country. And it's all connected. You know, it's not, I think that we really do need to remember this. It's not just an attack against Donald Trump. It's an attack against the American people.
I agree.
And I wanted to move on. We have a little bit left, and I wanted to talk about, you know, we have this whole thing where the Palestinian Authority has met with the president in the White House, President Trump. They met about, what was it, a week or so ago? I mean, it seems so long ago because everything else happens in between. Uh, but that was the leader Abbas, Mahmoud Abbas, and they were talking about this peace agreement with Israel. And at the time, you know, Abbas was saying, yeah, you know, I'm really open. That'll be, you know, that's great. I'm looking forward to it. We really need to talk about it. And now this new thing is coming out. This came out in the Jerusalem Post, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this. He's now saying, yeah, sure, this will be great. You know, I want to talk about it, like to have a peace agreement, but there's one caveat. We can't possibly have a peace agreement without the involvement of Russia in it as well. So Russia needs to be able to sit at the table with Palestine and Israel to have this discussion. To me, Bill, this is end time stuff here.
I would agree. Well, first of all, I mean, going back decades now, you know, Yasser Arafat was very close to the Russians, and before that, the Soviets. I mean, back during the days of the PLO, you know, he made many trips to Moscow, you know, so there's a history here. My opinion, that historical tie runs very deep, and philosophically, strategically, because when it comes to Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority and those that they represent, you know, on the upper levels, you know, the leadership, you know, I only believe they lie when their lips move. So, so to involve the Russians is to make a statement, as far as I'm concerned. And yes, I agree that it has prophetic overtones, but going back to Daniel 9, and this is the chapter that some eschatologists, or you know, those who study prophecy, get the idea that there's going to be a peace treaty that comes involving Israel. The one thing that people overlook is, or some people overlook, is that it doesn't say that the Antichrist makes a peace treaty with Israel. It doesn't say that. It says that this prince who comes makes a treaty or confirms a covenant, actually, with many. So here's where I'm going with this. This peace process is going to, according to Scripture, involve many nations. And so now you've got Abbas saying, well, we don't need just the United States to be involved with this. We need the Russians to be involved with this, which is, I'm sure, behind the scenes, Abbas's nod to Putin that we consider you to be re-emerging as a world power, and we want to bring you into the stage, which is, depending on how you interpret some prophetic scriptures, right on cue. So all of that is to say, I agree, it has prophetic overtones. What happens, obviously, we're going to have to wait and see, but I don't believe for one moment that these things are going to unfold without Russian involvement to some degree or the other. Now, what makes that even more interesting to me is this whole idea of, you know, what we were just talking about, the alleged Russian collusion, you know, with the Trump administration, right. And now the Trump administration being involved with going to Israel, talking to Netanyahu, talking to Abbas, and, you know, at least making overtures, as to bring about some kind of peace process. And now we're going to bring the Russians in. So won't the media
Once
have a
again,
heyday with that too, right?
yes.
So,
Yeah.
but no, it's the stage is set. You know, we'll see what happens. You know, but yeah, it is very interesting.
And it's also interesting too, because one, we're not hearing about this in the United States. We didn't hear that. It came from the Jerusalem Post. So
Right.
nothing is mentioned. Nothing is also mentioned in regards to the financial ties that the Palestinian leader has with Russia. And,
Well,
that's significant.
well, that's what I was alluding to, you know, in part when I was saying this runs very deep. There's a big connection between the Palestinians and the former Soviets and the Russians. I mean, to me, Putin, I'm not sure he's abandoned the whole Soviet, you know, ideal.
KGB's alive and well, you're saying.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, and I think, but because they don't mention it now, like you said, the media is going to get this sooner or later, more later, because they want to see what's developing. They want to wait till Trump gets over there, and then Russia's somehow involved, and they can say, "See there, we told you, he's involved with the Russians, and look at how much money went back and forth between Palestine and Russia." And so, is any agreement going to be fair? I mean, I can see the headlines now in the Washington Post and other media outlets, on the left. So I think it's important to talk about it now, Bill, like you and I are doing, so that people can understand that this is, when you see it, remember when we told you about it, so that you can see what was happening. But and Monique is saying she never knew there was a connection between the Palestinians and Russia. See, and that's something she's not going to hear until it's time. But I think it's interesting, and I think your point that you said, Palestine is also trying to say, Russia, we acknowledge you as a world power, and we want the world to acknowledge you as a world power as you enter into this agreement, this very important agreement in the Middle East that will impact the world. So it puts Russia in that strategic position, either right alongside America or maybe even more important than America, because the leader Abbas did not say we need the United States. He said we need Russia.
Yeah. Well, he's going to stroke Putin's ego. And as Russia prospers, so will her little satellites and her little allies, like the Palestinian Authority. Look, I am not one of those that agrees with everything the Israeli government does. They do some things that I don't agree with, but remember how the Palestinian Authority came to be. It's the offshoot of the PLO,
right,
which was a terrorist organization. There's the Palestinian Authority, at least, very recently, was in cahoots with Hamas.
Right.
There were many members of Hamas that were elected to the Palestinian Authority to represent the Palestinian people. So, this is not a peaceful organization. This is not someone who wants to coexist with Israel. This is someone, and I've said this many times, they don't want PEACE. They want a PIECE, and then another piece, and another piece, and another piece. That's the kind of peace that motivates them to go to the negotiating table. And so that tie with Russia, in concert with that little bit of tidbit of information, is to suggest that we see Russia reemerging. We're going to keep that relationship strong, and because we have ultimate goals, that we're going to be the power here. They have a motivation, a spiritual motivation from their religious worldview to push the Jews into the sea, to eradicate the state of Israel, and Russia is someone they see perhaps could neutralize the United States being such a support for the Israeli government. So, I'm not behind the scenes in the back rooms listening to all the conversations, but I've studied history and I know what the Bible has to say. And so this is a prophetic development, I believe.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I think, when I mentioned something like that about the Palestinians and Russians working together, it to me, and I just find this a little bit surprising that we in the United States, many of us, seem to be so ready, willing, and able to open our arms welcomingly, if you will, to Russia. And I don't understand that. Russia may not be our complete and total enemy, but I don't know about you. I don't trust Russia at all. And I don't see that there's a reason to trust Russia. But all of a sudden now for a number of people, they're like, what's the problem? Well, what's wrong with Russia? They're great people.
Well, first of all, Nazis were a political party, and then there's the German people.
Exactly.
The German people suffered because of the Nazis and because they didn't stand up to the Nazis.
Right.
All right. So they bore some responsibility in the things that happened. There's the Russian government and the Russian leaders, and then there's the Russian people. So, there are some distinctions. There are some good Russian people. There's some good Palestinian people. I've met them. I've talked with them. I've been to their homes. So when we talk about these things, we're not just, branding everybody that's a Palestinian is bad or everybody that's a Russian that's bad. That being said, why is there a Russia today and not a Soviet Union? That's because there were people like Ronald Reagan and people like that who stood up to the Soviet Union and says no, or niet. We're not going to agree to that. We're not going to play the game your way. And so because they took steps and not through, violence, but actually peaceful actions, but nonetheless standing up for what we believe and doing what we could do lawfully, peacefully, and just outmaneuvered the Soviet Union and put so much pressure on them until it crumbled. That's why we have a Russia today and not the Soviet Union, because there were people who believed in their convictions and stood on them. So the fact that you have Russia re-emerging now should tell us something, and that has political connotations, but as far as I'm concerned, the spiritual implications are far more important. And that is that we have, as a country, as people, we have grown lax, we've grown apathetic, and now we're dealing with all these things in our own government. And we see Russians reemerging, we see the Palestinians acknowledging that. Hey, things are taking shape. And so that ought to be stuff that gets our attention, that awakens us.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You have to look at the government of Russia. I'm not talking about the people of Russia, but you're looking at the leader of Russia specifically. He's not necessarily a good guy.
He's KGB. And so no, why would I trust that? I don't trust that at all. So again, there's good Russian people. There's bad Americans. But when we look at the politics of it, the leadership, I don't think we should trust the Russians. I think that we should go back to what Ronald Reagan said: trust but verify.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and I think we excuse me. Every week we kind of see it like losing my voice again. How the Russians are off this coast or that coast, and we've intercepted this and that and the other. And I think we need to be cognizant of that and remember that, and not be so trusting.
Well, what does that say? We're going to push you. We're going to test the waters. We're going to see we're going to test your resolve. Can you imagine that happening 30 years ago when Reagan was in power, when he was the president? And not everything that Reagan did was exactly right necessarily. But here's a strong person who believes in his convictions. He stands on them, and he moves upon them. And because of that, it gained the respect of the entire world, including the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapses. And so if now they're going to kind of flex their muscles again, hey, we better have some convictions that are established on things that are true and virtuous and good. And we better be ready to put those convictions into operation And this is across the board, because there's always going to be the progressives and the Saul Alinsky disciples and the Washington Post that are going to try to undermine. They're going to test. They're going to try to find a place to worm into what's good and undermine it. And if that's not enough, we've got the Russians testing our resolve on the exterior. So we've got it from the inside and the outside. Hey, we better do something.
Well, and look at, with the Russians, we let them get involved in Syria, and look what happened. I mean, they basically took over Syria and said, get out of here, United States. We don't need you. So every time, we quote unquote partner up with Russia, they seem to kind of take over and run the show. And I think that we maybe should have learned a little bit from Syria in that regard, to be more cautious in looking at things. And I haven't really heard, Donald Trump. I mean, he kind of sort of leaves it open. I'm going to trust people until I don't trust them. Or I'm going to take information I have about them. I'm going to be cautious, but I'm going to talk to them anyway. And a lot of people don't like that. They think, why talk to them at all? I think it's good that he talks to them.
Yeah,
and
I do too.
Yeah, and what I've seen so far, he's had pretty good discernment about them, meaning that he doesn't trust them. A lot of people in the news say, oh my gosh, he's going to do this, this, and this. And it never comes to fruition. He hears them out, and then he decides, nope, not going to go with those people. I'm going against them. Or,
Right.
Go another way.
Well, I mean, what's the old saying? You keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, that's just wise. You don't just shut them off. So, yeah, he should talk to them. But after he's learned what he needs to learn, make the proper decision that is in the best interests of the American people. That's his job. That's what he swore to do. And then hopefully and this is my personal prayer, that he will do what is what is right in the eyes of God. Not just the political choice, but the moral, spiritual choice too.
And I have to say, I think in a lot of respects, there's a number of people who don't like him because he does try to be a Christian, and he mentions God, talks about God in the White House. He talks about God at different speeches. And I think this is also something that we haven't seen so much of. And I think it just kind of brings up I'll call them trolls for lack of a better word. It kind of brings out the trolls because they don't like hearing that. One, some of them don't believe he's a Christian. Two, the ones that believe that he's a Christian don't want him to continue and to have a platform, as a Christian. I think there's so many different things that are spiritually going against him that, honestly, I don't know. He's 70 some years old. I don't know how he gets his energy other than from God. I don't know how he keeps going. He goes from very early in the morning until late at night, and he has to put up with people going against him, like what we've seen in the media, the White House press corps, and on and on and on. I don't know who at that age or any age would want to take on that responsibility.
Well, I don't want the job. I know that.
Yeah.
Well, as far as him invoking the name of God, that's great. That's wonderful. I hope he continues to do that.
Yeah.
I find it almost a little comical that, in this setting now that we have, someone in that position mentioning God in a positive way. It's like, going into the dungeon where the vampires are, and then pulling the curtain back to see them just, scream in pain because of the light. I kind of like watching that. But beyond that, I truly and genuinely pray for this president that he will not only invoke the name of God, but that he will be a follower of God, that he will be a disciple of the Messiah, and that he will make decisions that are based on biblical principle. And I know we're short on time now, but I have been talking with some people who are actually part of his spiritual advisory council, and they're telling me some things that are very, very encouraging. And I'll just leave it at that.
Well, maybe we can do another show and talk about that more, and talk about, what we need to do. Again, I think there are suggestions that, praying for this president, we absolutely have to do. We also need to stand up. So Bill, I want to thank you so much for being here, and everybody who is here today. Thank you so much. I appreciate, and I know Bill does too, you're getting the word out about shows like this so that we can spread, the truth. And then that's what we need to do. And as Christians, we should always be about getting the truth out there. So until next week, thank you so much. God bless you, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.